You are now tuned in to the Audiopile Power Hour right here on B-Side Radio. Got a special show here for you today. An interview with Adham Shaikh, the legendary and prolific producer who was based right here in Vancouver in the electronic music scene in the early to mid 90s, as well as an interview alongside Tim Humphrey, who runs the record label Rediscovery, an imprint dedicated to reissuing classics, as well as more obscure music from the 1990s ambient, dub, and techno scenes from around the world. The two recently teamed up for a double LP survey featuring tracks from Shaikh's earlier years. Shaikh now resides in Nelson, BC, but still produces music via his imprint Sonic Turtle, and has also got some upcoming scores for documentaries. Tim Humphrey's Rediscovery label, which began in 2020, has released some vinyl reissues from artists like Human Mesh Dance, A Positive Life, Mysteries of Science, and Deep Space Network, with some upcoming releases later this year by Japanese trio Ambient 7, Florida producer Strike, and a survey of two projects by New York City producer Dietrich Schoenemann, including his trio Prototype 909 and his duo in Facil. We'll have a listen to some of those other artists later in the show. But we'll start things off today with a track by Shaikh called Ascend, which was released on a compilation called Ambient Systems 2. And that release was part of a series of ambient comps issued on the imprint Instinct Ambient, a sub-label of the Instinct Records label. Instinct Ambient was actually a notable player in the 90s ambient movement, featuring many of the artists and releases that Tim Humphrey's Rediscovery label has dedicated themselves to shedding new light on. So without further ado, here is Ascend by Adham Shaikh, followed by my interview with Shaikh and Humphrey. Thanks for tuning in. with Adam, I wanted to talk about um, the Vancouver scene when you were starting out in, would it be 92, 93?
Yeah, I started in like, 91 even, but like it took a couple years to kind of, meet the cool people that were throwing the good parties, so to speak,
Yeah.
or at least the guys that seemed to recognize that ambient rooms were like a really cool thing to have at your parties and gatherings. And there was sort of like that 90 to about 95 where most of the parties had like a nice chill out room, and they were still in that uh, mechanics of
Yeah.
having one or two main rooms and then like a really cool chill out.
Okay. And then, like, where would the shows have been? I'm a bit younger than you. Like in 1990, I was 10 or 9.
Okay.
So I missed out on that completely. My intro to electronic music in general was mid 90s, Warp Records, and then moved on
Oh
from
yeah.
there. So I'm actually like very curious to hear what that scene, um, like, what was the overall vibe at like shows? Were they well attended? Were there like, like, just kind of set it up, like
Yeah, yeah.
what it was like.
Well, there definitely were shows, and there were some raves that were 5,000 people, 6,000 people. Like they would bust into a warehouse on Terminal Avenue somewhere, break into the office, forge papers. That was one that sticks in my mind. Get that office letterhead, type out, "We've given permission to so and so and so and so to our warehouse this weekend, blah, blah, blah." The cops would show up, they would show them the paper, and they'd be like, "Oh, okay," and leave. Like it was in the early days of sort of that aspect. It was everything from the Lux Theater and different like scratchy venues down on Hastings Street. There were a couple like after hour warehouse lofts in Gastown that people used to throw parties. There were a bunch of loft spaces in Yale Town before it became kind of Yale Town,
Yeah.
and really got developed in the kind of mid 90s. And in the early 90s, there were people in there in warehouses, $200 a month rent for like a scratchy warehouse, but that was where artists were living. There were still kind of lots of little affordable nooks and crannies in the city, or at least I guess that was the tail end of that. And so people were throwing parties everywhere, and it was sort of word of mouth, or it was like a little obscure flyer at one of the record stores with like a pager number on it, and you'd call that and it would have a message, or it would say go to such and such a parking lot at 8 p.m., or and then on the hour, and the car would pull up and like check everybody out and then yell out, "Okay, it's at such and such and blah blah blah." And so there was like that was the kind of thing. There was no cell phones, there was no social media, so
Yeah.
there was a certain amount of detective work. And I think that anybody that wanted, like, had that hunger or curiosity went out. There was more, everything wasn't just overwhelmingly, served to you on your phone and every
Yeah.
5 minutes a new invite for a new party and whatever. There was sort of like this word of mouth. That's all I could really say. It was like circles of friends, and one of them would know someone who knew the warehouse or knew the DJ or knew the promoter or something, and it would just the word would get out.
Yeah.
So I think that was exciting. There were always a couple rooms, or at least in the bigger ones, some of the smaller parties and some of the Lux Theater, maybe it was just one room. Sometimes they were underattended. It definitely felt like we were the underground. It wasn't a mainstream thing. You didn't, it was often like 100 people would be like an amazing turnout sometimes for
Yeah.
some of these little events. There were some Doc Martin shows where he was like an amazing DJ. He's since moved to LA, but like he cut his teeth up in Vancouver and the West Coast, Seattle and Whistler. And This guy would play house records for 7 or 8 hours. He'd be the only guy with a little light on the table, light bulb, like so he could see the records. And he would play for 6 or 7 hours. People would keep handing him beers. He would never go pee. I would always be watching. He was like, this guy, like, he never leaves the decks. Like, what? He's got a bladder like the size of a elephant or something. And
Yeah.
so there was a a real sense of community. Like everybody, their scene was small enough that everybody really knew everybody. It hadn't been dominated yet by the fashion thing. Like now there's all sorts of cool rave gear, and like people are making all sorts of great outfits and costumes. Like it was, yeah, it wasn't even about that. You'd see dudes in jeans with like, lumberjack fucking jackets, all the stuff that's now hipster or whatever.
Yeah.
People just wore whatever. It was more about the party. There wasn't even often visuals. Like it was like you heard the music, maybe took some acid or some mushrooms or something, and you tripped and hung out, and like you would then land or like come up in the chill out room, hanging out with all your friends, rolling joints and stuff, and like, yeah, it was a different thing. And then it slowly changed and morphed and evolved, and that's just sort of the way it goes, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. So what would the like I work in a record store, so I'm curious what the record store scene was like. I understand that like Otis was a bit of a like kind of a landing spot for maybe you in particular. I don't know if it was the whole scene.
Otis was
Um,
definitely a huge place. Todd was an amazing curator and purveyor of stuff. And like, I didn't really have any used vinyl, but I had some CDs. My first CD, Realignment, which I think one of the songs on this vinyl comes from. Uh, like, he would buy 10 of those a week off me at
yeah,
like $15. And that like literally was that's how I lived. That was money that went turned around and would go and buy groceries or something. Um, then there was Odyssey Music that our friend Phil Western owned and ran, and he was like, as keyboard players, we all kind of found each other, and so he was a friend. And it's sort of like at one point, I lived with a couple DJs, and it was I can't remember the day. It was either like Tuesday and Friday, or it was Wednesday and one other day were record shipment days, and that was the day that everybody headed down to one of the record stores, and in Tyler's Basics at some point, and there were a couple others, and they would you know try to be the first one there at 10 o'clock in the morning to go through the new pile. And that was off, I think it was Wednesday or Thursday, because that was often when the new flyers would come out for that
yeah,
weekend. And so there was kind of like there was a bustle, and people like went out at 10 a.m. on whatever that day was to check out the new vinyl and buy potentially new wax for the parties that weekend.
yeah,
Um, and that was when all the early Rising High and Aphex Twin and stuff like that started, trickling through, and the Orb, and lots of ambient, the KLF Chill Out and stuff. And my roommate Steve Keddy was had his finger on the pulse and a real taste for a lot of like what was going on in the UK. And, kind of we had that in our living rooms every week. And, sometimes we would party, and, he'd be playing records in the morning, and like we'd hear all this stuff. And so that was what sort of further kind of connected us
okay.
all.
And then what would have been your introduction to electronic music? I mean, obviously you're immersed in it at this point, but there would have been something that you heard, I would assume, sometime in the late 80s
Well,
that would have
early
kind
80s
of,
actually. I
fair
started
enough.
playing the piano,
Okay.
like in the mid 70s, and piano lessons and all that. And, by the time I was 15, 16, I was also listening to keyboard music. There was a program on CBC called Brave New Waves with
Oh
Brent
yeah.
Bambry and someone else. And I would lie, and it started like midnight or one. And I had like a cassette recorder radio thing, like I had a radio and a cassette. And
Yeah.
I would lie in bed with my finger on the pause. And as soon as like the first two bars of like some electronic something, whether Cabaret Voltaire, Front 242, Ministry, like all sorts sorts of weird, obscure electro. As soon as it was electronic, I was recording,
Yeah.
and that was like I think a start of discovering electronic music. Early Tangerine Dream. Like I bought the first Kraftwerk record. Like when I heard that, I was like, wow, that's cool. Heard it on Brave New Waves, and went to Kingston and harassed the record store people into finding it and ordering it. Uh, you know, um, I think my introduction to keyboards came in the early 80s and synthesizers, and I just wanted to get my hands on that stuff. The music teacher in our high school, I was like playing saxophone in the band, but he got a little synth and he put it in the little back room, and so then I started going there on lunch and staying after school to mess around with it. And then he got two synthesizers, and he got a computer with a 4-track MIDI sequencer, and then they got a drum machine. And then by that point, I had convinced my parents to like give me money to buy a synth, and I bought like a Roland JX10, this big analog synth, and then I bought a DX7 because we heard that was used on the last Michael Jackson album, and it was this new FM synth. And I just became addicted to synths and electronics and doing stuff with that. Um, and through my studies, like I wanted to be a helicopter pilot. Just got accepted to RMC and discovered in the literally the day of school in your last phase of medicals that I was red green colorblind, and thus couldn't pick a red dot from a green dot on a dashboard panel, and they're like, no, you can't do that. So then I pivoted into chemical engineering, did 2 years of that in Ottawa. Actually walked on the Parliament Hill, puked on that flame, and had an epiphany of like, no, I don't want to be a chemical engineer. I want to be a musician. I've been interested in music my whole life. I've been liking this. Okay, I got to tell my parents. And they were like, okay, but you got to go to university for it. So I got accepted to Queen's University and
Okay.
started doing a degree in composition and electroacoustics and all of that. And so I did 3 years of that. I didn't finish, sadly. Interpreted my composition professor's comments of basically can't teach you how to compose, can show
Yeah.
you how to analyze what other people do, but that comes from doing. Like if you want to compose, then fucking compose.
Yeah.
And so I interpreted that as okay. So I got on my motorcycle, drove to out west to Vancouver because I had heard my friend worked at Network Records, and there was like a burgeoning electronic scene out west that was more alternative, like Skinny Puppy and that kind of stuff,
Yeah.
which more aligned with my interest in industrial music. Toronto was like Chris Shepherd and top 40 dance. It was
Yeah.
clubs and dance, which I tried in Toronto. Like I went there and like you could never get in. No one was interested in what you were doing. So
Mhm.
I moved out west, and like that was where I kind of connected with the underground scene. Got a job in a music store. I was working at Tom Lee Music, and so would meet all the keyboard players and musicians, and people would come in, and that was how I built up friendships with people, and that sort of really just kept me going in wanting to write and learn and explore my own stuff, and realizing that the only way to do that's by doing it. you know
Yeah.
so I just sort of got on with it.
So I mean, the new comp is obviously focusing on the earlier years. You've never really stopped, as far as I can tell, right? Like
No,
it's been nonstop. Are
still going
you? Yeah. Are you full time musician? Is
full
that it?
time since I left my job at Tom Lee Music in 1992.
Okay.
I haven't had a quote unquote job. I mean, I've done a million things and worked for lots of people and things, but I would say that everything has been music related. Whether it was mixing sound at a club as a job, or being a resident DJ, or
Hmm.
producing records for people, I've always continued, releasing my own music, and still do. And have no plans to stop if I can keep, some pennies flowing. It's
Yeah.
definitely been harder this last few years. We've all been locked down. There's no shows. No one's going out dancing. No one's buying music
Yeah.
to play for people going out dancing. No one's coming to me to produce their albums that they're going to sell on tour because there's no tour. So everything's kind of, slowed a bit, but I give thanks that I'm still in the creative seat. I've been doing a bunch of film work, and I'm composing right now for the lady Krista Lawton, who just did this incredible documentary Us and Them about the homeless situation in Vancouver. It was
Okay.
a couple of years old now, with Gabor Mate. That was,
Yeah.
really showed a lot of his work. So I'm composing for that. I got hired to be a composer for a big CBC documentary series about the interface of man and nature, where it's being, positive, starting in next year. So there's, like, things, being very grateful to
Yeah,
be.
that's amazing. I've noticed it's funny. I have to admit, not knowing your stuff at all until this comp was coming out.
Oh, cool.
Started to do some more research. Found a huge body of work, and then because I live in Vancouver and I work in a record store, I've been seeing like all this stuff come in that I just never really like clued into before.
Oh, yeah.
We had this big CD collection we've been going through, and I think there was at least two of your CDs in there on Sonic Turtle. Is that the name of the
Yeah.
label?
Yeah.
Two of those, and then I had a conversation with this guy who bought a like a 2 LP set. I think it's remixes maybe that you'd done. Echo.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. For Interchill. Yeah.
Yeah, Seance Center out in Toronto seemed to have located some dead stock copies. So we bought some. We've been playing it in the store. That was kind of my real intro to your work.
Oh, cool.
But then this guy came in. He bought it, and we were talking a little bit about your work. And he said he found a tape. This might not lead to anything, but he found a tape of yours, and I think it said like DJ Adam
Oh, yeah.
92, and it's just your music from that era. Like he wasn't sure what it was. If it was like a promo tape or something you would have sent to.
Yeah, sometimes at parties, you'd like record a couple tapes of your latest stuff and just have in your pocket. People would often come up, "Hey man, you got any new stuff?" And you're like, "Oh, $20." And you'd be like, "Okay." And like back when people used to buy music sort of on a higher level.
Yeah.
And so yeah, like there's loads of one-offs that like I might have made two that weekend to go to a party, and what they have on them is different than what I might have put the next week, or
Huh.
yeah.
Okay, that makes sense.
That's so cool. That's so cool that
Yeah.
there's some of those things still floating around. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
he just found it in a pawn shop and just bought it. Just said,
That's
DJ Adam
awesome.
on it, scooped it up. So I wanted to shift this now to the relationship between you and Tim and what he's done with Rediscovery. Maybe Tim, if you could, like, I know you're like well versed in this world. I follow you on like Facebook and stuff, and you're always posting like crazy records that I've never even heard of. But you must have had an older connection to Adam's music. Do you remember how you got onto it?
Yeah, probably about 92, 93. In those early days, probably of 1989, probably to about 1995, before people were listening to like DJ mixes to kind of expand their, what I call kind of like their tree of knowledge, to find new artists. The best way to do that before DJ mixes that were sold were compilations, of course. And compilations were huge for me for that time for finding music. I was already really interested in, and especially pre-internet, how scenes evolved and stuff like that. So I was really already a big Skinny Puppy fan, big Network fan. Final Cut, early Jeff Mills on there, and Severed Heads and Alien Sex Fiend, and the whole Vancouver scene. In fact, I went to Expo '86 when I was about 10.
Okay.
My parents took me out there, and so I just always had this kind of visual of what the music would sound like there. And we stayed with people that we didn't even know, and they were really nice. And I love the Expo '86 and just the whole. I went to a hockey game, and hockey is my favorite sport, and I just kind of soaked up that kind of that Vancouver feel, and that just everybody was so nice, and it was very pretty. We went to Bouchard Gardens, and just really enjoyed that trip, and that was always one of my favorite trips as a kid. And so as the years kind of came on, and I would find artists and music from the label, Adam's name kept on coming up. I would go through Dozier record compilations and Instinct record compilations, and then later to Inner Chill, like you mentioned. So Adam's music always kind of stuck out to me because he was kind of the only one that was really doing like an organic, spacey feel.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody else kind of had an ambient dub feel, or maybe more of a chill out, UK kind of techno feel. But Adam seemed to be the only one that was kind of bridging ambient dub with a little bit more of like field recordings and that kind of organic sound where it really had a perfect kind of spiritual, psychedelic kind of nature aspect that I really kind of gravitated to. And, I just followed him ever since.
Yeah.
That was kind of background. Yeah.
So then putting this comp together, you're about what at this point 8 titles deep into the label, 7.
We've released 6, and then I have 7 I'm working on right now that should be out in the next 2 months, 2 or 3 months.
Yeah, I saw.
So I kind of went into overdrive the last couple months, so I got a lot of stuff coming out.
Yeah, I saw some test presses pop up online of some stuff coming out, I guess.
Really?
But so I mean, you mentioned earlier when we were talking about this, you just reached out to Adam, just straight up, just messaged, "Hey man, love your work, want to put some out?" Is that literally the?
Yeah, I don't know if I think I knew Adam a little bit on MySpace.
Okay.
But I don't think he remembers me. But there was a certain time I think I've at any point or at some point in early internet, especially probably MySpace and a little bit earlier, I probably reached out to every artist that's been on Instinct Ambient at some point or another and just said, I'm your biggest fan. That's my favorite label. Someday I'd like to be involved in helping bring back your music, or if you guys like to get back together, I like to be involved. And I just always, love that circuit and that era of music. And I'm sure at some point I reached out to Adam and just said, "Hey, I really love your music." Mm-hmm. But then, once it kind of came through that I was actually going to do a label, then, Adam was certainly on my mind very early. And he was kind enough to, let us do this. And I just reached out to him, and, it's been really awesome. So, I mean, that's a great thing about, people say a lot of bad things about social media and stuff like that, but I've met so many of my music heroes and people like yourself, Mark. And I think that's the beauty of, the internet.
Yeah, there's some kindness to be had out there on the internet. That's for sure.
For sure.
And then when it came to putting this actual comp together and picking the tracks, like, did Adam, were you just take what you need, just build what you want? Or did you guys kind of collaborate, like, nah, let's make sure we get this track on or that track, or make sure Journey to the Sun's there? Was it just Tim just kind of running with it, or?
Yeah, I think Tim came with like a list of maybe 7 or 8 tracks that he had, resonated with. And then we kind of just sort of looked at them. And then, I think it was also a consideration of like the size of the release, or if it was going to be like on 1 vinyl or 2. A lot of the songs back from that era, they were all quite long.
Yeah.
So that, sort of became a consideration too of like how to pair them. But I think Tim had like a clearer vision, or I certainly feel like I had said, look, like as an independent objective observer, like I'd be very interested to hear what you think are your favorites and like what you really resonate with. And
if I can add to that, I think the big thing for me was I'm kind of torn, to be honest with you, about doing sort of best of or excerpts of or compilations just in general, but I love compilations so much because I kind of think of, I don't want to, if somebody wants to come out and bring Journeys to the Sun out on vinyl in full, I feel bad taking a song from it, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to keep that project as it is, and so somebody can do that in the future. I always hate picking up reissues of something and, somebody takes the best song of a 2-song EP and then you don't feel like giving the other one.
Yeah.
And so it kind of ruins it. So I tried to be really careful, and that's why I took three from compilations, and then one from one release, and then one from his first release,
Yeah.
just to kind of give it a little bit of taste of the differences, because certainly Adam had a little bit of a trance feel, but also ambient dub and a little bit of the Journey of Sun definitely has a field recording sound to it. So I wanted to take a little bit of each, but then not necessarily ruin the opportunities for others to take, to come along and reissue other stuff of his.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I would love to do Journeys of the Sun, but it just fits so awkwardly on vinyl. And there is some music that I think definitely belongs on CD more than on vinyl.
Yeah.
Because they're long players and stuff like that. And a three-record vinyl to fit Journeys of the Sun is a little bit challenging. But it's certainly there. And hopefully, that'd be something in the future somebody does.
Yeah. Probably getting ready to wrap up here. I think Zoom kicks us out in about 5 minutes. So I just want to drop one last question. This is kind of for both of you. There's definitely, there seems like there's been over the last couple of years, especially a real resurgence in the sounds of the 90s electronic scene, like early 90s, ambient techno, ambient dub, that stuff, tons of reissues, tons of compilations. Everyone's ears are kind of being pointed back in time. And there's lots of new people making interesting music along those lines too. It's a whole different conversation. But would either of you have any like inkling as to why now?
Well, I think to keep it as short as sweet, because I could go on that for like probably a half an hour, but I think in that time, and I kind of, because I have an engineering background, and I kind of think of things organically and the looseness of the music. Then it's not, I think the best thing you can do as an electronic producer is make electronic music sound as real as possible and as human as possible. And I think when you look back at the time, because all the the type of machines and how the personality of those machines seem to go together in such a carefree and less exact. There's a lot of kind of feeling and organic feel in those, and it's not so rigid. It just seems like that time was a great time for experimentation and sound.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of it was just done with the most basic equipment. And I think in those times, in the 80s and 90s, you just had people doing more with less, versus now you have so much and you're doing less.
Yeah.
Well, that's my thoughts. How about you, Adam?
Yeah, I think that's a very astute observation. That I think that in that time, we weren't totally in the computer. The computer was an anchor point,
Yeah.
but it was, if you wanted 5 sounds in your song, you needed 5 synthesizers, to do that. And so that meant MIDI playing out, and you had to do performances and like change that drum pattern and then do this and then mix. And if you fucked up the mix or hit the delay too hard and it distorted, you had to go back and start again, because it was sort of like recording onto a DAT or a 2-track. And so there was a lot more live performance of the instruments and the sliders and knobs and drum patterns and delays and things. And so I think that certainly contributed, although you had to work harder as well to get stuff to feel alive and musical, like when it would often just sound like, oh, he's got 4 things plugged together. And I think the computer and, all the software and everything in the box, there was a big period where we struggled to get some of that performance aspect back, and so everything became really digital and very analytical, and every bit that you hear is thought about and put right there and considered, and it's a much more precise, it's much more like an orchestral score now with sound, where every sound is exactly where you want it, and you can rehearse the delay overdub pass, and when you hit it too loud you can go back and edit that bit down, and everything can be edited perfect, and so it loses sometimes some of that thing that I think that a lot of the electronic music that was coming out in the late 80s and 90s was, or early 90s was, on found equipment and the cheap stuff. Like, we were buying up all the analog synths for $200 that everybody was selling because they wanted the brand new digital Korg M1 or the whatever. And so there was just like, rolling 909s for $100 and 808. Just everybody was dumping this junk. And so I think that is totally a huge component of that. And I think that we were so underground, there was no hope of being overground, and so you were able to just focus on expressing your discovery. Like, you weren't trying to do this, or I think something that's drastically changed in our current landscape is that music is written and engineered for clicks now, and like, you got to get people off the first two bars, you better be hitting them with the melody before they click to the next song, and you better be less than 3 minutes for the Spotify algorithm and all of that. And so people have changed how they're writing. Like, back in the day, if the song felt like it was 19 minutes long because you felt like you were engaged for that, then do that. Now you'd be like, there's no point putting out a 19-minute song. There's no clicks on Spotify for a 19-minute song, I just released actually a Dream Tree project song, which is a project I have with a sitar player in Montreal. And the song's 25 minutes long.
Yeah.
It's not going up on any of the streaming servers. I put it up on Bandcamp. We probably had 100 sales, on Friday, and that was cool. But it's kind of like something that, like, what do you do with a 25-minute song? Like, I've put out a couple ambient songs now, one for 6 Degrees, and he had me go back in, and like, it was 39 minutes long. It was for music for sleep with a narrator, and then he had me go back and chop it up into 5-minute chunks so that he could put, and my opinion was it kind of ruined the song. Like, it's but so I think there was just a special time, and like, it was pre-social media. We weren't doing things for clicks and likes. We were doing things because we loved them.
Yeah.
And I think that has, been influenced a bit. It's harder to do stuff because you love it now. There's so many other pressures.
Yeah.
But I'm stubborn. I still do it because I love it. I don't care. I'm going to put out a 25-minute song, whether you like it or not. Like, I don't know.
It's funny you say that, because we were just talking about how we have a friend who's working on a video for one of the tracks on this Adam's release, and he was like, "Oh, can we shorten it for video?" And I was like, "I'd like to keep it the length it is." It's not even though it's 9 minutes, we have to pay him. I'm gonna have to pay him
for a video.
Yeah, so but hopefully it's slow moving. Maybe put some stuff in slow motion. But I've always thought of Adam's work is very visual, and I'm excited to kind of put some visual to Adam's work, and kind of give it a different kind of life, and just kind of see where those things go. I think there's an opportunity for visual to be tied a little bit more to, especially ambient music and things like that. So I'm hoping to put some DVDs and stuff out in the near future as well.
Yeah, that'd be amazing. You're still tuned in to the Audiopile Power Hour right here on B-Side Radio. Hopefully you found that interview enlightening to what the scene was like almost 30 years ago, and had a fun time chatting to those two. You can actually find a lot of the releases on Rediscovery at Audiopile Records. Physical shop is up on Commercial Drive, just near 4th, or you can visit the website at audiopile.ca. You can check out a lot of those releases there. Many are up for sale. Many of them are done in pretty limited runs, so it is an act now or regret later type of situation with some of those. Anyways, we do have one more track that we want to play here from Adham Shaikh. It is a track called Oberon, Gray Matter, which was taken from his 1993 album Realignment and issued on his very short-lived label, Modulation Electronic. So yeah, we got one last track here from Shaikh, and then we'll follow that up with a few more tracks from the Rediscovery label, and we'll be back to chat about a few of those. So put on the headphones, dive into this one, and we'll be back soon.
big rooms, big areas underground there. When you stood in it, it was maybe, my memory tells me at least that it was maybe 5-6 meters to the roof. And you'd see bats hanging up on the roof. Some of the caves were full of bats. But some of them were very small and very narrow. You had to crawl and squeeze your way through. The caves are, many of them are deep and narrow, and if you get in one of those caves, it's cool and moist. Moist, yeah. I mean, the Indians lived in them, in that part of the world. The Appalachian Mountains are very old mountains, so the caves are very old. When I say very old, I can't tell you in years, but they're millions of years old. We went into all of them when we were young boys, and we were always looking for connection, figuring, well, if they're that close to each other, maybe if we go far enough into one, we'll find that it leads into the other one, and we can come out somewhere other than where we went in. We won't have to go back and use the entrance as an exit. We'll find another way out, like the animals.
You're still listening to the Audiopile Power Hour right here on B-Side Radio. The top of that set there was Adham Shaikh's Oberon Grey Matter, and that was followed by Zenn La, the album opener of Deep Space Network's classic 1993 debut album Big Rooms, which was issued on the duo's own label, Source Records, and the first release to be reissued by Rediscovery. During its 92 to 2005 run, Source issued releases by prominent ambient, techno, and IDM artists like Spacetime Continuum, Move D, Sutek, Gescom, Jan Jelinek, and PETA, many of which are now considered classics. Following that track there was Mysteries of Science and their track Diffusion, taken from his 1993 debut release and reissued on Rediscovery's survey of his works. Mysteries of Science was one of many projects by Dominic Paul-Woozy, who worked under many, many aliases, though Mysteries would become his most well-known. And after that, we had Human Mesh Dance's Dahlia, taken from his 1993 debut, High Align, and that was a 12-inch EP, and reissued via Rediscovery as High Align Extended, featuring 2 extra tracks. Human Mesh Dance was the project of the renowned producer and artist Taylor Dupree, who handled much of the artwork for the Instinct record label, as well as releasing a ton of music under his own name, many other aliases, and was also involved in a ton of groups like SETI and Prototype 909, who we'll hear a bit of momentarily. And since 1997, he's also run the 12K label, one of the most prominent ambient-focused labels in existence, and still runs to this day. Following Human Mesh Dance, we had Bathdub, a track taken from the 1994 album Synesthetic by the UK outfit A Positive Life. That album was initially released on the UK label Beyond, and though the label was short-lived, only running from 1992 to 1996, they were responsible for issuing classics by artists like Higher Intelligence Agency and Biosphere, and Rediscovery has just reissued the Positive Life album in full. We got 2 more tracks here for you. Next up, we have the track Tree Frog by the duo of Facil, comprised of the aforementioned Dietrich Schoenemann and alongside his partner Abe Duke. The duo had a sole self-titled release in 1995 on the Instinct ambient label. And to end things off, we have a track by the trio of Schoenemann, Taylor Dupree, and Jason Sostek, together known as Prototype 909. The track Transit was actually taken from a 1994 comp on Instinct called Plug In and Turn On. Both tracks by Facil and Prototype 909 can be found on an upcoming comp by Rediscovery called Excerpts 1993 to 1995 to be released later this year. We will have that one in stock when it comes out right here at Audiopile Records. You can find many of Rediscovery's reissues on our website at audiopile.ca, as well as in the physical shop, 2016 Commercial Drive. Thanks for tuning in this month to the Audiopile Power Hour. We'll be back in April with an all-new episode. Here's Facil's Tree Frog, followed by Prototype 909's Transit. Thanks for tuning in.
Entonces le vas a decir, ahora que conozco un poquitito más de ti, te amo un poquitito más. Vamos a ver, vamos a ponernos. Vamos a trabajar. Separar. Los maridos se separan de la esposa. Los parientes de los parientes. La Biblia establece al principio de que desde el momento en que yo te odié, a ti ya te maté y soy reo de muerte yo. Esto es, el que odia ya es un homicida. Jesús lo puso de esta manera: el que llame a su hermano rata, rata, es digno de muerte, reo de muerte. ¿Qué quiere decir eso?